Welcome to War Bios, the podcast where we delve into the most pivotal battles in history, examining the strategic decisions, tactical innovations, and human elements that shape the course of warfare. Today, we're going to explore one of the most fascinating and decisive conflicts of the 18th century, the Battle of Narva, fought on November 30th, 1700. This clash between the Swedish Empire under King Charles XII and the Russian Empire under Peter the Great would not only determine the fate of the region, but also have far-reaching consequences for European politics and military strategy. In the late 17th century, the Baltic region was a hotbed of tension, with several powers vying for control. The Swedish Empire, under the young and ambitious King Charles XII, had been expanding its territories through a series of successful military campaigns. Meanwhile, Peter the Great, the modernizing Tsar of Russia, sought to secure access to the Baltic Sea and challenge Swedish dominance. King Charles XII, who had ascended to the throne at the tender age of 15, was already renowned for his military prowess and daring tactics. He had united the Swedish nobility behind him and was determined to defend Sweden's territorial gains against all comers. Peter the Great, on the other hand, was a man on a mission to transform Russia into a modern, European-style state. He recognized the importance of a strong military and had been busy reforming the Russian army along western lines. As tensions between Sweden and Russia escalated, the city of Narva, situated on the border between the two empires, became a focal point of contention. In 1700, Charles XII led his army into Livonia, then a Swedish province, to confront the Russian forces gathering near Narva. The Swedish king was determined to defeat the Russians before they could threaten his territories or disrupt the balance of power in the region. Peter the Great, aware of the impending battle, had been busy fortifying the city of Narva and assembling a large army to face the Swedes. He had also been seeking alliances with other European powers, including Saxony and Poland, to counterbalance Swedish influence. However, his efforts were hindered by the fact that many of these potential allies were wary of Russia's growing power and hesitant to commit themselves to a war against Sweden. As the summer of 1700 drew to a close, the Swedish army, numbering around 8,000 soldiers, marched towards Narva, ready to face whatever forces Peter the Great had arrayed against them. The Russians, with approximately 35,000 troops, were dug in behind formidable defensive lines, awaiting the Swedish attack. The city of Narva, with its strategic location on the Narva River, was a crucial prize for both sides. Control of the city would grant access to the Baltic Sea and secure vital trade routes, making it a pivotal objective in the war between Sweden and Russia. As the two armies faced off, the fate of the region hung in the balance, and the outcome of the battle would have far-reaching consequences for the future of European politics and warfare. In the days leading up to the battle, Charles XII and his generals carefully surveyed the Russian defenses, searching for weaknesses to exploit. The Swedish king was known for his bold tactics and willingness to take risks, but he also understood the importance of careful planning and preparation. Meanwhile, Peter the Great and his commanders were confident in their numerical superiority and the strength of their defensive positions, but they were also aware of the Swedes' reputation for military prowess and the need for caution. As the Swedish army approached the Russian defenses on November 30th, 1700, Charles XII and his generals devised a bold plan to outmaneuver the numerically superior Russian forces. The Swedes had been observing the Russian positions for days, noting the strong fortifications and artillery emplacements that protected the city of Narva. However, they also detected weaknesses in the Russian lines, particularly on the flanks, where the defenses were less robust. The Swedish king decided to launch a surprise attack on the Russian right flank, hoping to catch the enemy off guard and exploit the weakness before the Russians could respond effectively. The assault would be led by the Swedish infantry, supported by artillery and cavalry units. As the Swedes advanced, they encountered a thick fog that had rolled in overnight, reducing visibility to just a few yards. This unexpected development actually worked in favor of the Swedes, as it allowed them to close in on the Russian positions without being detected. At around 10 a.m., the Swedish infantry emerged from the fog and launched a fierce assault on the Russian right flank. The Russians, caught off guard, were initially unable to respond effectively to the sudden attack. The Swedish troops, armed with bayonets and supported by artillery fire, quickly broke through the Russian lines, causing chaos and panic among the enemy ranks. As the Swedish infantry pushed forward, They began to roll up the Russian defenses, forcing the enemy to retreat in disarray. Meanwhile, on the Swedish left flank, a separate battle was unfolding. A large Russian force, led by General Nikolai Golovin, had launched a counterattack against the Swedish positions. However, the Swedes were well prepared and held their ground, repelling the Russian assault with heavy casualties. As the Russian attack faltered, the Swedes counterattacked, driving the Russians back and securing their own flank. As the battle raged on, Charles XII rode into the fray, directing his troops and inspiring them to fight on. Despite being outnumbered, the Swedes were better trained and more disciplined than the Russians, and they began to gain the upper hand. The Russian defenses were crumbling, and their army was on the brink of collapse. By mid-afternoon, the Russians were in full retreat, abandoning their positions and fleeing in panic. The Swedes pursued them, cutting down any who stood in their way. The battle was all but over, with the Swedes emerging victorious against overwhelming odds. As the fog began to clear, the extent of the Russian defeat became apparent. Thousands of Russian soldiers lay dead or wounded on the battlefield, while the Swedish army had suffered relatively light casualties. In the aftermath of the battle, Charles XII surveyed the carnage and praised his troops for their bravery and discipline. The Swedish king had won a stunning victory, one that would go down in history as one of the greatest military upsets of all time. As he rode through the battlefield, he came across a group of Russian prisoners who begged for mercy. Charles XII, known for his chivalry, granted them quarter and ordered his men to treat the wounded Russians with respect and kindness. As the Swedish army pursued the fleeing Russians, they captured vast amounts of equipment, including artillery, ammunition, and supplies. The Russian defeat was so complete that it would take them years to recover from the loss. Charles XII, meanwhile, had cemented his reputation as a brilliant military commander, and his victory at Narva would go down in history as one of the greatest triumphs of the Swedish Empire. In the months and years that followed, the Swedes continued to press their advantage, launching a series of successful campaigns against the Russians. The Treaty of Travendal, signed in 1700, marked a significant milestone in this conflict, as it forced the Russians to surrender key territories and pay a substantial indemnity to Sweden. However, the Battle of Narva also had far-reaching consequences that extended beyond the immediate conflict. It marked a turning point in the Great Northern War, as the Swedish victory checked Russian expansion and allowed the other European powers to breathe a sigh of relief. As the historian Bengt Liljegren observed, the battle was a demonstration of Swedish military prowess, and it showed that the Russians were not invincible. Today, the Battle of Narva is remembered as a testament to the bravery and discipline of the Swedish soldiers who fought against overwhelming odds. The battle is commemorated in Sweden and Estonia, where it is seen as a symbol of resistance against foreign aggression. In Russia, on the other hand, the defeat is still viewed as a national tragedy, a reminder of the country's vulnerability to attack from the West. It shaped the course of European history, influencing the balance of power and the fate of nations for generations to come. As the Swedish historian Anders Flohen noted, the battle was a defining moment in the history of the Swedish Empire, marking the high point of its military power and influence. That's all for today's War Bios. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, I'm General Biography reminding you to keep marching toward victory.